Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm so grateful to have you here with me today. Every video I create comes from my heart and my dedication to bringing you quality content that matters. I work tirelessly, putting in 15 to 16 hours a day, pouring everything I have into each video because I truly believe in the value of what I'm sharing. But I need your support to keep going. If you subscribe, it gives me the energy and motivation to push even harder, to keep creating and sharing more with you. Without your support, I am nothing. You're not just viewers, you're my inspiration. I'm asking for your support, your belief in what I do. Let's build something amazing together. From the bottom of my heart, I pray that you continue to support this journey. With every subscription, every like, and every comment, you help me grow and keep the passion alive. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for believing in me. In a world where power, temptation, and love collide, betrayal and desire tells the story of Ethan, a wealthy CEO, and his loyal wife, Anya. Their world is turned upside down when a shocking proposal leads to an unimaginable exchange. One night, one choice has the power to destroy everything they hold dear. Can love survive betrayal, or is the price of temptation too high to pay? This is a story of loyalty tested, hearts shattered, and lives changed forever. Stay tuned. What happens next will leave you breathless. Ethan Carter walked into the company's canteen like any other afternoon. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air. But today, something was different. As he waited for his order, his eyes landed on a woman behind the counter. She wasn't the kind of woman who typically turned heads at corporate gatherings or luxurious parties. There was no expensive designer dress, no glamorous makeup, no carefully practiced charm. And yet, Ethan found himself unable to look away. Anya, the canteen worker, moved with quiet grace. She handed a steaming cup of coffee to a customer, her fingers brushing the edge of the cup lightly. Her dark brown eyes filled with kindness as she smiled. There was something genuine about her, something that felt real in a world of pretense. Ethan had spent his life around people who wore masks. In boardrooms, in grand mansions, at exclusive parties, everyone had an agenda. But here she was, unaware of his presence, her laughter soft and unfiltered as she spoke to an older colleague. His heart did something strange. It skipped a beat. "Sir, your coffee," the barista said, breaking his trance. Ethan blinked, realizing that he had been staring. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Actually," he said, his voice unusually hesitant, "I think I'd like to get a coffee from her." He nodded toward Anya. She turned, surprised, as he approached the counter. For a moment their eyes met, and Ethan felt as if the air between them had thickened. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't forced, wasn't sculpted. It was raw, unpolished, and effortlessly stunning. Anya, on the other hand, felt a jolt of panic. She had seen him before. Of course she had. Who in the company hadn't? Ethan Carter, the young billionaire CEO, a man whose face was on the covers of business magazines, whose name was whispered with admiration and envy alike. Why was he standing in front of her? "One black coffee," he said, his voice smooth, but his eyes still searching hers. "Please." Anya nodded quickly and got to work, her fingers slightly trembling as she reached for the coffee pot. This had to be a mistake. Maybe he was just being polite. Maybe he didn't even realize she was the one serving him. She placed the coffee cup in front of him. "Here you go, sir." Ethan smiled, taking the cup, but he didn't leave. Anya, right? Her breath caught in her throat. He knew her name. "Yes," she stammered, feeling warmth creep into her cheeks. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving hers. "I've never seen someone pour coffee with so much patience before." His tone was teasing, but his expression was serious. Anya chuckled nervously. "It's just coffee, sir." "To you, maybe." but to me it's the best cup I've had." The way he looked at her sent an unfamiliar flutter through her chest. She told herself that he was just being polite, that he probably spoke this way to everyone. But deep down, she knew he didn't. For days, Ethan kept returning to the canteen, making excuses just to see her. He would linger a little longer than necessary, ask about her day, make small comments that left her flustered. One day, as she handed him his usual coffee, he said, "Anya, would you have dinner with me?" She nearly dropped the tray in her hands. Dinner?" "Yes." "With me," Ethan said, his gaze warm yet firm. Anya laughed nervously, shaking her head. That's not possible." "Why not?" "Because—" She hesitated, her heart pounding. "Look at you, and look at me. You're a billionaire, young, handsome, powerful. I'm just a simple woman working in a canteen, and I'm brown." Ethan's expression softened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Do you really think love has a color?" Anya was stunned. Ethan gently reached for her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Anya, love doesn't care about class, wealth, or race. It just happens, and I know what I feel when I see you." She stared at him, her mind racing. This had to be a joke, right? Or maybe he was just doing this on a whim. "Ethan," she started, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't fit into your world." "You don't have to," he said simply, "because I'll walk into yours." Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever looked at her the way he did. No one had ever told her that she was enough. Despite her fears, despite the doubts clawing at her mind, something about the sincerity in his eyes made her say the words she never thought she would. "Okay." And just like that, her world changed forever. The wedding was nothing like the grand celebrations Ethan Carter's family had imagined for him. There were no lavish ballrooms, no diamond-studded gowns, no aristocratic guests raising their crystal glasses in toasts of approval. Instead, the ceremony was small, intimate, just close friends, a handful of family members, and a love too powerful to be ignored. Anya stood in front of Ethan, wrapped in a simple yet elegant sari, her deep brown eyes reflecting both love and uncertainty. Ethan, in a tailored suit that spoke of his status, held her hands, his grip firm, reassuring. "I promise to love you beyond society's whispers," he vowed, his voice steady. "Beyond judgment, beyond expectations." Anya's throat tightened. The world had told her that love like this didn't exist, that men like Ethan didn't choose women like her. But here he was, standing before her, proving them all wrong. The moment they were pronounced husband and wife, Ethan pulled her close, whispering against her forehead, "You're mine, and I'm yours. That's all that matters." A marriage that defied expectations. Their wedding became a topic of hushed conversations. Ethan's business associates whispered about his unconventional choice. His mother, though present at the ceremony, struggled to mask her disappointment. "She doesn't belong in our world," she told Ethan one evening. Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. "Then maybe it's time our world changed." But Anya never let their whispers define her. Despite now being the wife of one of the most powerful men in the country, she refused to quit her job at the canteen. Ethan had given her everything: a mansion, a fleet of cars, an account that held more money than she could ever spend. But she wasn't with him for any of that. She loved the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the chatter of customers, the laughter she shared with her colleagues. She had worked hard to build a life of independence, and she wouldn't let marriage take that away from her. "You don't have to do this anymore," Ethan told her one evening, watching as she neatly folded her work apron. "I know," she replied softly, "but I want to." His heart swelled with admiration, but deep down a small part of him wondered, was her love for him enough? Colliding worlds. Ethan never said it out loud, but there were moments he feared their two worlds would crash against each other. There were nights when he returned home from high-profile meetings, exhausted from negotiations worth millions, only to find Anya peacefully asleep, the scent of coffee still clinging to her clothes. She lived in simplicity while he thrived in extravagance. He loved her fiercely, but doubts crept in at times. Could love alone bridge the gap between their realities? Then, one evening, as they sat together on the balcony of their mansion, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Anya placed her hand over his. "I know what you're thinking," she said quietly. Ethan turned to her, surprised. "You wonder if I'll ever truly fit into your world," she continued. "And maybe I won't, but I don't need to. Because love isn't about belonging to the same world, it's about building a new one together." His throat tightened. Anya squeezed his hand gently. "I don't care about wealth, Ethan. I care about us. That's why I stay at the canteen. Not because I need to prove anything, but because I want to remain the woman you first fell in love with." Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart filling with an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But you have me anyway." And in that moment, Ethan knew. No matter what the world said, no matter how different their lives had once been, there was no one else he'd rather build his life with. The grand ballroom glittered under golden chandeliers, their soft glow reflecting off the crystal glasses filled with champagne. Waiters moved effortlessly through the crowd, serving hors d'oeuvres to the elite, powerful businessmen, high-ranking executives, and their exquisitely dressed partners. Ethan Carter stood at the center of it all, his arm wrapped around Anya's waist. He had attended countless company galas before, but this was different. Tonight his wife was by his side, her presence both grounding and illuminating. Anya had been hesitant about coming. These events weren't her world. She preferred simple joys over extravagant displays of wealth, yet she had put on a dark red evening gown, let the makeup artist touch up her soft brown skin, and walked into the lion's den of high society, holding Ethan's hand. "Are you okay?" Ethan whispered, as he leaned toward her. Anya nodded, offering a small smile. "Just trying not to spill my drink." Ethan chuckled, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "You look breathtaking." She blushed, her fingers tightening around his. As the evening progressed, Ethan moved through the crowd, shaking hands and making polite small talk. Anya stayed close, but as he was pulled into a conversation with a board member, she excused herself to get a drink. That was when Ethan saw her. Across the room, standing near the bar, was a woman so effortlessly elegant that she seemed to belong to another era, one of old Hollywood grace and unshakable poise. Her silky white dress clung to her slender frame, the fabric shimmering with every movement. Waves of golden hair cascaded over her bare shoulders, and when she turned slightly, Ethan caught a glimpse of striking ocean blue eyes. He didn't realize he was staring. For a moment, the sounds of the party faded. He had seen beautiful women before. He had dated models, socialites, women with wealth and influence. But there was something about her presence that pulled him in, an air of quiet confidence that made her stand apart from the rest. He found himself walking toward her before he could stop himself. "Good evening," he said smoothly, offering his most charming smile. She barely glanced at him. "Evening," she replied coolly, sipping her wine. Ethan chuckled, unbothered by the lack of enthusiasm. "I don't think we've met before. I'm Ethan." "I know who you are," she cut in, her tone polite but distant. "Intriguing." Ethan tilted his head. "And you are—" She finally turned to face him, her blue eyes unreadable. "Olivia." "Olivia," he echoed, tasting the name. "It's a pleasure to meet you." She nodded, unimpressed. There was a pause before Ethan gestured toward the dance floor, where couples swayed to the slow melody of a string quartet. "Would you care for a dance?" Olivia's expression didn't change. "I'm married." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't mean you can't dance." She smiled then, not a warm smile, but a knowing one. "It does when I don't entertain other men." Ethan wasn't used to rejection, and he certainly wasn't used to being dismissed so easily. His charm, his presence, these were things that had always drawn people toward him, but Olivia stood there untouched by it all. "Your husband is a lucky man," he said, intrigued. Olivia took another sip of her wine. "Yes," she said simply. Ethan hesitated, watching her, before he finally asked, "Who is he?" She tilted her head slightly, as if debating whether to answer. Then, with a small smirk, she said, "Ryan. He works in your company." Ethan frowned, trying to place the name. "Ryan?" he repeated. "What department?" "Finance," Olivia replied, and then it clicked. Ryan, the cashier, the man who handled small transactions, who probably earned less in a year than Ethan spent on a single vacation. Ethan's expression shifted, and Olivia noticed. "Surprised?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. He was stunned. A woman like Olivia, stunning, sophisticated, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in the arms of someone powerful, was married to him. "I wasn't expecting that," Ethan admitted. Olivia smiled again, finishing her drink. "I'm sure you weren't." And with that she turned, walking away, leaving Ethan standing there, the bitter taste of curiosity and wounded pride settling deep in his chest. For the first time in a long time, a woman had walked away from him, and he wasn't sure if it was rejection that stung more, or the fact that she belonged to another man. The thought began as a whisper in Ethan Carter's mind, dangerous, reckless, unshakable. Olivia had captivated him in a way no woman had in years. It wasn't just her beauty, it was her defiance, the way she had dismissed him without hesitation. And she belonged to a man who barely made enough to keep their lives afloat. Ethan couldn't let it go. The idea festered, grew, and soon he found himself reaching for his phone. "Tell Ryan from finance to meet me in my private lounge," he instructed his assistant. The lounge was one of Ethan's most exclusive spaces, hidden in the highest floor of his company's skyscraper, a sleek, dimly lit room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A single, massive leather couch sat in the center, a bar lined with the finest whiskey behind it. It was where he entertained only those he considered important. Ryan entered hesitantly, clearly uneasy. He was an average man, dressed in an outdated suit, his shoulders slightly hunched as if burdened by life itself. He wasn't used to this level of luxury, to being summoned by the CEO of the company. "You called for me, sir?" Ryan asked, his voice cautious. Ethan gestured to the bar. "Drink?" Ryan hesitated before nodding. Ethan poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing one over. "Relax," Ethan said smoothly, leaning back on the couch. "I just want to talk." Ryan sat stiffly across from him, cradling the glass but not drinking. Ethan swirled his own drink, studying him. "You're married to Olivia." It wasn't a question. Ryan's eyes flickered with pride. "Yes." "She's extraordinary," Ethan said, testing the waters. Ryan gave a small smile. "She is." Ethan exhaled, setting his glass down. Then, without preamble, he said the words that had been burning inside him. "I want to spend one night with your wife." Ryan froze. His grip on the glass tightened. "What?" "One night," Ethan repeated, his voice calm, almost businesslike. "In return, I'll give you $1 million. The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. Ryan's mind barely processed what he had just heard. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. Surely he had misheard. But Ethan's expression was unreadable, serious, waiting for a response. Ryan shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "My wife is not a transaction," he said, his voice trembling with fury. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply picked up his drink, taking a slow sip. "You could change your lives, Ryan," he said. "One night, $1 million. Ryan's hands curled into fists. "I'm not selling my wife." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "You're struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. You think I don't know that?" He let the words sink in before continuing. "With that money, you could buy a house, pay off your debts, give Olivia the life she deserves." Ryan felt sick. "This conversation is over," he snapped, turning toward the door. Ethan's voice followed him. "You'll regret walking away from this offer." Ryan didn't stop. He walked out, slamming the door behind him. A man's battle with his conscience. The cold night air hit Ryan like a slap as he stepped outside. He walked home in silence, his mind in turmoil. He had done the right thing. He had defended his wife's honor. But then, why did doubt gnaw at his insides? $1 million. He and Olivia had spent years struggling, living in a cramped apartment, skipping meals to make ends meet, watching bills pile up with no way to pay them. One night, it would be over before dawn. Would Olivia forgive him if she knew it was for their future? Would she understand? His steps slowed. Was love more important than survival? By the time he reached home, he had no answers, only questions that haunted him through the night. The weight of Ethan's offer lingered in Ryan's mind like a dark shadow, creeping into every thought, every quiet moment. It haunted him at work, gnawed at him during dinner, and whispered to him in the dead of night. $1 million. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was the end of their struggles. It was everything he and Olivia had dreamed of, but never dared to believe they could have. For 3 days, Ryan kept the secret buried inside him, but it festered, poisoning him with guilt and temptation. On the 4th night, he finally broke. The conversation that changed everything. Ryan sat on the edge of their small, worn-out couch, his hands clasped together as he watched Olivia move around their cramped kitchen. She was humming softly, her golden hair tucked behind her ear as she stirred a pot of soup, cheap ingredients stretched to last the week. He swallowed hard. "Olivia," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, smiling softly. "Yeah?" He hesitated. How could he say this? How could he even bring it up? "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said. "Something that might change everything for us." Olivia frowned, setting the spoon down. "What is it?" Ryan exhaled shakily. "Ethan Carter made me an offer." She arched an eyebrow. "An offer?" Ryan's heart pounded against his ribs. His voice felt foreign as he spoke the words aloud. "He wants to spend one night with you. In exchange, he'll give us $1 million. Silence. A suffocating, deafening silence. Olivia's expression didn't change at first. It was as if she hadn't heard him, but then her lips parted slightly, her chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. "Tell me you're joking." Ryan looked away. "I'm not." The room turned ice cold. Olivia took a step back, as if putting distance between herself and the words that had just been spoken. "That's disgusting," she spat, her voice laced with fury. How could you even consider something like that?" Ryan winced. "I refused." "Good," she snapped. "But—" She stilled. "But—" He clenched his jaw. "But I've been thinking about it." Olivia's eyes widened, disbelief flashing across her face. "Ryan, just hear me out," he interrupted, his voice shaking. $1 million, Olivia. Do you know what that could do for us? We could leave this miserable life behind. We could get a house, start a business, never worry about money again. Olivia stared at him as if she didn't recognize him. "This is our marriage we're talking about," she whispered, her voice trembling. our love, our dignity. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration bubbling over. It's one night, Olivia, just one, and then it's over. Nothing has to change between us. Her laugh was hollow. You think it wouldn't change anything? You think we could ever be the same after that? Ryan fell silent. Deep down, he knew she was right. But then Olivia did something he didn't expect. She turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She wasn't looking at him, but he could hear her breathing, deep, unsteady. She was thinking about it. The realization made his stomach twist. Olivia, he said cautiously. She didn't turn around. You said, one night. Ryan swallowed hard. Yes. She slowly exhaled. And $1 million? He hesitated before nodding. Yes. There was another long silence before she whispered, maybe you're right. Ryan's heart clenched. Olivia. She turned to him, her blue eyes clouded with conflict. It's just a night, Ryan, and then we walk away. We take the money and never look back. He searched her face, hoping to find the disgust she had expressed just minutes ago, but it wasn't there anymore. Instead, there was something else. Desperation, resignation, and worst of all, temptation. The deal is made. The decision wasn't made with ease, but once it was spoken aloud, it felt final. They set the terms. One night, no emotions, no regrets, just a transaction. They would check into separate hotel rooms, and at midnight, Olivia would go to Ethan. Ryan avoided looking at his wife as they confirmed the date, the time, the details. He couldn't shake the feeling that something sacred was being broken, something they might never get back. The weight of the decision. The night before, Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Would Ethan see her as a prize, a conquest? Would he touch her the way Ryan did? Would she be able to look at herself in the mirror the next morning? She turned to Ryan, who lay with his back to her. He hadn't touched her in days. Ryan, she whispered. He didn't answer. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his arm. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Will you still love me after this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's throat tightened. I don't know, he admitted. Her chest ached. Neither of them knew, but the deal had already been made, and there was no turning back. The night had felt like an eternity to Anya. Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat matching the dread that had settled deep inside her. She had been hesitant when Ethan had first suggested she come to this hotel room, unsure of the plan that had been set in motion. But she trusted him, believed in the promises he had made. She clung to the love that had once felt so pure, so real. As she approached the hotel room, the familiar chill of uncertainty coursed through her veins. She had no idea why Ethan wasn't here, why he had made her come alone. She hesitated at the door, her trembling fingers brushing against the cold knob. With a deep breath, she pushed it open, but the man standing before her was not Ethan. Her heart skipped a beat, her breath catching in her throat. Ryan. His presence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the warmth and security she had once felt in Ethan's arms. He stood there, his face a mask of indifference, the weight of the room pressing down on both of them. Anya blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog of confusion. "Where's my husband?" Her voice shook as the words left her lips, fear creeping into her chest. Ryan's gaze was empty, his posture rigid as he met her eyes. "Tonight, you are mine," he said coldly, his words like daggers in her heart. "This is the deal." Her breath caught. The world spun around her, the air suddenly too thin to breathe. "What?" she gasped, stumbling backward, her mind racing. "No, this can't be real. This isn't happening." She wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed by the cruel reality crashing down around her. She stared at him, her mind still struggling to understand what he was saying, what was happening. Her hands clenched, her nails digging into the soft fabric of her dress, trying to hold herself together. But the more she tried, the more the pain tore at her from the inside. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw, desperate. I don't understand. Where is Ethan? Where is my husband? What is going on?" Her voice cracked, a sob escaping as the tears welled up in her eyes. Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed the unease he felt. He had never expected it to be like this. He had never imagined that seeing Anya's pain would cut him so deeply. But this was the deal. The price had already been paid. He had no choice now. Anya's heart shattered as the truth began to sink in. Her husband, the man she loved, the man she had trusted beyond measure, had sold her out. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was betrayal, and the weight of it crushed her in ways words couldn't describe. "Ethan," she whispered through the haze of tears, her body trembling. "How could you? How could you do this to me?" The agony in her voice was raw, aching, as if her very soul had been torn in two. She stepped back, her legs giving way, as the depth of her grief overwhelmed her. She sank to her knees, her hands clasped in front of her as though pleading with the universe to explain this madness. "Please," she choked out, "even if I am brown, even if I am poor, I love my husband. I would never betray him. I would never—" Her voice broke as the words caught in her throat. "Please, don't do this. Don't make me do this. I don't want this." Her tears fell freely now, each one carrying the weight of every broken promise, every shattered dream, every ounce of love she had given to Ethan. How had it all turned into this? Ryan stood frozen, his mind spiraling. Anya's words, her pain, her purity, her unwavering loyalty, struck him like a thunderbolt. They echoed in his chest, reverberating through every fiber of his being. He had expected anger. He had expected hatred, but he hadn't prepared for this, her complete, utter heartbreak. He had never seen someone so broken, so vulnerable. Anya's love for Ethan was raw and fierce, unlike anything he had ever witnessed. She was everything Olivia was not, true, loyal, and full of dignity. Olivia had no problem with betrayal, no qualms about selling herself for wealth, for power. But Anya was different. Her love was pure, unwavering. And Ryan realized in that moment just how lucky Ethan was to have her. The disgust Ryan felt in that instant wasn't directed at her. It was directed at himself. He had crossed a line he could never return from. How had he let his desperation, his ambition, blind him to what truly mattered? Anya, this beautiful, broken woman before him, had just laid bare the essence of true love, and he had been the one to try to destroy it. His conscience screamed at him, drowning out the rationalizations he had held onto all this time. What had he done? Anya's sobs filled the room, each one a reminder of how far they had fallen. Ryan stepped back, the weight of his guilt sinking into his bones. His mouth went dry, his throat tightening as he tried to find the right words, but nothing seemed adequate to undo what had been done. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, I can't do this." Anya looked up at him, her eyes swollen and red, her chest heaving with the effort of holding herself together. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. Ryan took a step away from her, his gaze averted. I can't be part of this anymore. This isn't right. I can't betray your trust. I can't do this to you." Anya stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest, a flicker of hope igniting amidst the pain. Ryan looked at her for one last time, his face filled with regret. "I'm sorry. Go back to him. Go back to the man who loves you. Don't let me be the one who breaks you." As he left the room, the weight of his decision settled over him like a suffocating cloud. Anya was left alone, shattered but free. The betrayal stung, but she would never allow herself to become the victim of their mistakes. She would find a way to heal, but it wouldn't be with Ethan by her side. Not yet. But she would find her strength again, piece by broken piece. The cold, sterile walls of the hotel room seemed to close in on Ryan as he sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The harsh, fluorescent light above him flickered, matching the chaos swirling in his mind. His heart felt heavy, weighed down by the decision he had made. It had seemed so simple at first. Just one night, $1 million. A quick escape from the crushing poverty that had defined his life for so long. But now, everything had changed. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. He had sold his wife, and more than that, he had betrayed her. Betrayed the love that had been so pure, so unconditional. His mind raced back to the moment when Anya had entered the hotel room, the shock in her eyes, the pain in her voice. "Please, don't do this," she had begged. And in that moment, something inside Ryan had snapped. He had seen her, truly seen her for the first time. The way she had stood there, broken but dignified, her loyalty unwavering. She had loved Ethan with a devotion he couldn't even begin to comprehend. But Ryan, he had sold his wife out of desperation, for money, for the hope of a better life. And now, in the quiet aftermath, guilt tore at him like a jagged knife. He had sacrificed the one person who had truly loved him for the fleeting promise of wealth, and he couldn't even bring himself to look at her now. He stood up, his legs unsteady beneath him, and walked toward the door. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him with every step. He could still hear Anya's voice echoing in his ears, her plea to be spared from the nightmare he had created. When he finally reached the door, he opened it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Anya was still standing there, her tear-streaked face a mirror of her broken spirit. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and pain, as if she couldn't believe what had just happened. "Go home," Ryan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I will never touch you. I can't." His words were like a release, an admission of his own failure. He couldn't bring himself to betray her any longer, couldn't bring himself to be the man he had been. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. Anya looked at him for a long moment, her body trembling with emotion. But she said nothing. She simply turned away, walking out of the room, leaving him alone with the crushing weight of his guilt. As she stepped into the hallway, Anya's heart was a tangled mess of grief and disbelief. She couldn't fathom what had just transpired. Ryan had been a stranger to her before tonight, but the depth of his betrayal had shaken her to the core. She had trusted him. But now she realized that her trust had been misplaced. She had thought that Ethan's love was the only thing that mattered. But it wasn't enough. Her thoughts were a blur as she stumbled out of the hotel, her hands trembling as she tried to make sense of what had happened. The cool night air didn't comfort her. It felt cold, just like the reality of what she had just experienced. She needed to get away, to escape from the suffocating weight of the night. Meanwhile, in the other hotel room, Ethan lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Olivia beside him, her soft breathing a stark contrast to the emptiness inside him. He had expected this night to be exhilarating, thrilling even. After all, Olivia was beautiful, her presence magnetic. But as he lay there beside her, he felt nothing. A deep void opened up inside him, an ache that he couldn't explain. No matter how much Olivia's beauty captivated him, it wasn't enough. She wasn't Anya. The contrast between them was stark. Anya, with her quiet strength, her unwavering loyalty, her humble grace, and Olivia with her flirtations, her calculated beauty, her hunger for luxury. It was as if a part of Ethan had died tonight, buried beneath the weight of his own choices. His mind kept drifting back to Anya. Her brown eyes, the way they had looked at him with such pure trust, were burned into his memory. He had loved her so completely, so entirely. But had he truly understood that love? Or had he just taken her for granted, assuming that she would always be there, that she would always forgive him, no matter what? As he turned his head, his eyes caught sight of Olivia's form beside him, her body pressed against the silk sheets. She stirred slightly, but he didn't feel anything. No desire, no connection. It was as if he were lying beside a stranger, a woman who had never captured his heart, never earned his devotion the way Anya had. Ethan let out a deep sigh, his body sinking into the bed, feeling the weight of regret settle over him like a suffocating blanket. He had made a terrible mistake. Anya was his heart, his soul, the very center of his world. And now he had let her slip away. His fingers clenched into fists as he realized that the moment he had chosen to betray her, he had lost everything. The emptiness inside him grew, gnawing at his insides like a hollow echo. He sat up abruptly, the sheets tangled around his legs as he pushed them off. His heart raced with a mixture of panic and desperation. He couldn't let this be the end. He couldn't let Anya slip away without trying to make things right. He had to fix this. He had to apologize. He had to beg for her forgiveness, because without her he was nothing. And somewhere, in the distance, Anya was walking alone through the cold night, her heart heavy with the weight of betrayal, her steps unsure as she moved farther and farther away from the man she had once loved. The morning sun cast long shadows across Anya's room, but inside, the light seemed to struggle against the darkness that had descended on her heart. She moved with mechanical precision, gathering her belongings, clothes, a few photographs, and a couple of books. She did not feel the weight of her bags as she packed them. What she felt was the weight of betrayal, of love shattered, and of dreams crushed under the heels of choices made by the man she had once trusted above all else. Her hands shook slightly as she folded her clothes, each item a reminder of the life she had tried so hard to build. But now she was leaving it all behind, leaving Ethan, leaving the promise of a future together. She had always believed in their love, thought that nothing could tear them apart. But now she realized that love alone was not enough when trust was broken. Anya's silence was deafening. She didn't scream. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. What was there to say? How could she put into words the pain that had lodged itself deep in her chest? How could she explain the hollowness she felt, the suffocating grief that overwhelmed her every time she thought of Ethan and the betrayal she had suffered at his hands? Her mother's house was the only place that still felt like home. It was the place where she could seek comfort, even if it was just a brief respite from the agony. But as she closed the door to their shared apartment behind her, she realized that she was also closing the door to a future she had once imagined, one with Ethan. The thought was unbearable. Meanwhile, Ethan sat in his office, basking in a fleeting sense of victory. He had gotten what he wanted, hadn't he? Olivia had spent the night with him. She was beautiful, just like Anya. He tried to convince himself that it had been worth it, that Olivia's presence, her cold allure, was enough to fill the void left by his wife. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He knew that the moment he had looked at Olivia, all he had seen was Anya's face. But he pushed those thoughts aside. He couldn't dwell on regret now, not when he had everything he wanted, or so he thought. Just as Ethan was about to dial Anya's number, he was interrupted by the sound of the door to his office bursting open. The figure standing in the doorway was familiar, but not in the way Ethan had hoped. Ryan stood there, his face a mixture of fury and anguish, his eyes red from crying. "Ryan?" Ethan's voice trembled, unsure of what to expect. "You don't deserve Anya," Ryan spat, his voice shaking with emotion. He strode forward, his hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You used her. You took her for granted. You—" Ryan's voice cracked, and for a moment it seemed like he would break down right there. Ethan's stomach twisted with confusion and panic. "Ryan, I don't know what you're talking about." Ryan's eyes burned with the fire of betrayal as he continued, his voice rising with every word. "She begged me. She cried for you. She said she loved you and that she would never betray you. But you—" Ryan choked on his words. "You had to make a deal. You used her. You sold her for one night, just like I did. But the difference is, she never asked for it. She's loyal. She's pure. And you—" Ryan's eyes filled with tears, his chest heaving with emotion. "You didn't even see it. You didn't even care." Ethan stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind refused to comprehend what Ryan was saying. He had always seen Anya as the one who loved him, the one who stood by him despite everything. But now, in the stark light of Ryan's words, he saw the truth in a way he had never seen it before. Anya had never betrayed him. She had always been loyal, always loved him with a purity he had taken for granted. She had stood by him even when he made mistakes, even when he had crossed lines he shouldn't have. And now she was gone. The realization hit Ethan like a wave crashing against the shore. His knees felt weak and his hands trembled as he reached for the nearest chair to steady himself. "No, no, that's not what happened," Ethan murmured, though he knew deep down that it was. Ryan didn't listen. His voice grew stronger, filled with righteous fury. "I let my wife go. I thought she could be bought. I thought $1 million would solve everything. But she's not like that. She's worth more than money. She's worth everything. And I—" Ryan's voice cracked again, and his hands trembled with regret. "I'm the one who failed her. I'm the one who betrayed her. But you failed her too. You took her for granted. You didn't see what you had until it was too late." Ethan felt his world begin to collapse around him. He had always seen himself as the powerful one, the one with control, the one who could make everything work. But now, in the face of Ryan's pain, he felt like a broken man. The guilt washed over him in waves, drowning him in a sea of regret and shame. Anya's words, her tears, the way she had begged Ryan to let her go, it all came rushing back to him. For the first time, Ethan understood the true depth of his mistake. He had not just betrayed Anya, he had lost her. And now she was gone. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible, but it was too late for apologies. Ryan didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked out of Ethan's office, leaving Ethan alone in the silence. The weight of the truth hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and Ethan could feel the walls closing in on him. Anya was gone, and Ethan had no one to blame but himself. Ethan's mind raced as he drove through the streets, his heart pounding in his chest. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. He had to fix this. He had to make everything right again. His thoughts swirled, chaotic and jumbled, as he replayed the events of the past few days. He had taken Anya for granted. He had betrayed her. And now she was gone. The weight of his mistakes pressed heavily on his chest, suffocating him. Every moment of his life had been controlled. Everything had been within his grasp, except for Anya. And now she was slipping away, and he had no idea how to stop it. As he pulled into the driveway of their shared home, he felt a sense of dread wash over him. The house was eerily quiet, and the front door was slightly ajar, as if it had been left in a hurry. Ethan's heart sank as he stepped out of the car and walked up to the door, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He pushed the door open slowly, hoping to find Anya sitting on the couch, waiting for him to apologize, to make things right. But the house was empty. The familiar scent of her perfume was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of abandonment. The rooms were bare, the bed unmade, and the space that once felt like home now felt cold and distant. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the realization hit him. Anya was gone, not just physically, but emotionally. She had left him behind. His heart twisted painfully in his chest as he stumbled back, his hands trembling. Where had she gone? He had to find her. He had to make things right. Without another thought, Ethan rushed to the car and sped to Anya's mother's house. His mind was consumed with guilt, shame, and desperation. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through. When he arrived at her mother's house, his hands shook as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open, but it wasn't Anya who greeted him. It was her mother, standing in the doorway with a stern look on her face. "I need to see Anya," Ethan said, his voice strained but full of urgency. Her mother's expression hardened. "She doesn't want to see you." Ethan's heart dropped. He had hoped, prayed, that somehow Anya would have softened, that she would have been waiting for him to come and explain, to beg for forgiveness. But instead, her mother's cold words pierced through him like a knife. "She's gone," Anya's mother said, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "She doesn't want anything to do with you anymore. You've broken her." Ethan's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the world seemed to tilt beneath him. He had broken her. He had broken the one person who had ever truly loved him, the one person who had trusted him without question. Tears welled up in his eyes as he stood there, unable to move, unable to comprehend what had happened. Anya had always been so strong, so full of grace, and now he had driven her away. He had destroyed everything they had built together. "I know I've made a terrible mistake," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Please, let me talk to her. Please, I need to make it right." Anya's mother shook her head. "There's nothing you can say that will fix this. You've hurt her in ways you'll never understand, and she doesn't need you anymore." The words hit Ethan like a tidal wave, drowning him in sorrow. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. He had always been able to fix problems, to control situations, to use his wealth and influence to get what he wanted. But not this time. Not with Anya. Ethan's legs felt like they were going to give out beneath him as he stumbled back from the door. The weight of his actions, the weight of his regret, pressed down on him like an anchor, pulling him deeper into despair. He had been selfish. He had been blind to the love Anya had given him. And now, it was gone. All of it. Ethan sank to his knees on the front step, his body shaking with the intensity of his grief. His chest ached as if his heart were breaking in two. He had lost Anya. He had destroyed the purest love he had ever known, the love that had once made him feel invincible. For the first time in his life, Ethan truly understood the meaning of loss. Not the loss of material possessions, not the loss of status or power, but the loss of something far more precious. Anya's love, her trust, her unwavering loyalty. And now he was left with nothing but the wreckage of his own selfish choices. Ethan stood up slowly, his face streaked with tears, and turned away from the door. There was no going back, no easy fixes, no magic words that could undo the pain he had caused. He had destroyed the one thing that had ever mattered to him. As he walked back to his car, Ethan felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. His world had crumbled, and he had no one to blame but himself. Ethan sat in his car, staring at Anya's house from the street, unable to summon the courage to approach the door. The sun had long since set, and the cold night air seemed to reflect the icy emptiness inside him. He had never felt this powerless before, never imagined that he could feel so utterly lost. His fingers gripped the steering wheel as he tried to calm his breathing, but the guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He had made a mess of everything, of his life, of their love. His heart ached with each passing minute as he sat there, paralyzed by his own mistakes. Anya was everything to him, and he had pushed her away in pursuit of something fleeting and hollow. His wealth, his power, his allure, none of it meant anything without her. As the hours dragged on, Ethan knew he couldn't just leave. He couldn't walk away from her, not after everything, not after what he had done. The idea of her being gone forever tore through him like a storm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he made a decision. Ethan opened the car door and stepped out into the cold night. He didn't care anymore about his dignity. His pride meant nothing. All that mattered now was Anya's forgiveness. Slowly, he approached the front door of her mother's house, his legs trembling, his body shaking from both the cold and the overwhelming weight of regret. He knelt down on the steps, ignoring the biting chill of the ground beneath him. His hands were raw, but it didn't matter. He placed them on the cold stone and lowered his head, unable to look up. "I'm sorry, Anya," he whispered into the silence of the night. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't realize what I had until I lost it." Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. The sound of his voice was hoarse, broken, as though the words themselves were heavy with the burden of his guilt. He sat there, unmoving, praying for the chance to make things right. Minutes stretched into hours. The cold seemed to seep deeper into his bones, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Every fiber of his being screamed for Anya's forgiveness. He knew it would be hard to earn it back, but he had to try. He had to beg. He had to show her just how deeply he regretted everything. And then, just as the night seemed endless, the door creaked open. Ethan looked up, his heart leaping into his throat. There she was. Anya. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her face pale and weary, but she was there. She was standing in front of him, looking at him with a mixture of pain and disbelief. She said nothing at first. Her gaze pierced through him, and for a moment Ethan thought he might drown in the depth of her silence. But then she spoke, her voice so quiet, so fragile, that it felt like a dagger to his chest. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she whispered, the words breaking her as much as they were breaking him. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. His whole body felt like it was caving in on itself. He couldn't bear to hear her say those words. But she had every right to feel that way. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and no matter how much he wanted to take it back, he couldn't erase the hurt he had caused. Tears spilled from Ethan's eyes as he looked up at her, his voice cracking with desperation. "Anya, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I will do anything to make it right. I was blinded by temptation, and I didn't see what I was throwing away. But I know now, more than ever, that you are my everything. Please give me one last chance." He couldn't stop the flood of tears. They came without warning, the years of bottled-up guilt, regret, and sorrow pouring out of him. Ethan's heart ached with every sob. He had hurt her. He had broken the one person who had ever truly loved him, and now she was standing in front of him, unable to even look at him. Anya stood there, her body trembling with emotion as she watched him, but she didn't move. She didn't say anything. Ethan, overcome by his own pain, took a step forward, his voice pleading. "Please, Anya, I'm begging you. Don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'll make it right. I will prove to you that I was wrong. I love you. I need you. Please don't walk away from me." His words were raw, full of anguish, and as he spoke, he dropped to his knees before her, unable to bear the weight of her silence any longer. He placed his hands at her feet, his face falling into them as he wept. "I was an idiot. I was foolish. Please, I need you back. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for this mistake. But please, give me the chance to prove I can be the man you deserve." For what seemed like an eternity, Anya remained silent. Ethan's sobs echoed in the stillness, his heart breaking with each passing second. He didn't know how long he stayed there, kneeling, begging, his pride shattered and his soul exposed. Hours passed, and the cold night seemed to stretch on forever. But still, Anya didn't speak. She didn't move. She stood there, watching him, her face unreadable. The pain in her eyes was almost too much for Ethan to bear. He had caused it, he had broken her heart, and now he was paying the price. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime of pleading, Anya spoke softly, her voice barely audible above the sound of his sobs. Why did you do it?" she asked, her words filled with hurt. "Why did you risk everything for one night?" Ethan looked up at her, his eyes swollen and red. "Because I was stupid," he whispered, his voice broken. "I was weak, and I thought I could have everything but you. I was wrong, Anya, so wrong." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned away, walking back into the house without another word. Ethan remained kneeling, his body trembling, his heart aching with the weight of his mistakes. He didn't know if she would ever forgive him. He didn't know if she could ever love him again. But as the night wore on and the first light of dawn began to break, Ethan knew one thing for certain. He would never stop fighting for her, no matter how long it took. Anya's heart felt like it was being pulled in two directions, each one a tug of raw emotion and deep pain. The man standing before her was the man she had once loved with all of her being. Ethan had shown her the world, given her a future she had never imagined, and made her believe in the power of love. But now, with every word he spoke, she could see the devastation he had caused, the betrayal, the doubt, the wound that would never fully heal. Her heart ached as she watched him kneeling before her, broken and vulnerable. He had shattered her trust in a way that felt irreparable, yet the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. She had never seen him so raw, so unguarded. The Ethan she had known was strong, confident and commanding, but now he was completely exposed, nothing but a man who had made a terrible mistake and was begging for forgiveness. She wanted to forgive him. She wanted to take him back, to forget the pain and rebuild their love. But her heart wasn't the only thing that had been broken. Her spirit, her sense of self-worth, had been deeply wounded by what he had done. Could she ever forget what had happened? Could she ever trust him again? The silence stretched between them, heavy with questions, doubts and fears. The air felt thick with the weight of her indecision. Ethan's tears had dried, but the ache in his heart had not. He was still kneeling in front of her, his face twisted in agony, his eyes pleading for her mercy. Anya could feel his pain, feel how much he regretted his actions, how deeply he had come to understand the magnitude of his mistake. He wasn't the man who had betrayed her. He was the man who now wanted to redeem himself, to make things right. But could she believe him? For hours, she stood there, her heart torn between love and self-preservation. Every part of her wanted to forgive him, to feel the warmth of his embrace once again, to return to the life they had shared. But a small voice in the back of her mind reminded her of the promises he had broken, the trust he had betrayed. She had built her life around him, around their love, and now she was left questioning everything. Could love truly heal this wound? As the minutes turned into hours, Anya felt a surge of clarity. It was not the pain that would define her decision, but the strength she had cultivated over the years. She was not just a woman who had loved Ethan. She was a woman who had always loved herself, who had fought for her independence, her dignity, and her self-respect. She was not about to lose that, not for him, and not for anyone. She turned to face him, her gaze steady, but her heart was still in turmoil. Ethan was waiting for her to speak, his breath shallow, his eyes wide with fear. What if she rejected him? What if she could never forgive him? The thought seemed to paralyze him, but he dared not move. Anya looked down at his hands, still clutching hers, his grip desperate, like a lifeline he didn't want to let go of. For a moment, she saw the man she had once loved, the man who had swept her off her feet with his kindness and care. But the truth was, she had changed too. She wasn't the same woman who had blindly trusted him. She had grown stronger. She had learned that love was not just about passion. It was about trust, respect, and understanding. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ethan, I love you. I always have. But what you did, it broke me. You took away the one thing I thought was sacred, my trust in you, and I don't know if I can ever fully erase that." Ethan's eyes filled with panic, but Anya held up a hand, silencing him. "But I see you now. I see your remorse. I see the pain in your eyes, and I know that you regret what you did. You have made mistakes, but I can see that you want to change, that you want to make things right." Anya paused, taking in the man who had once been everything to her. Her heart still ached, but she could feel the weight of his sincerity. She loved him. She loved him so much that it hurt, but love alone couldn't be enough. She needed more. She needed to know that he would never repeat this, that he would never break her heart again. "I can't promise that I will forget what happened," she continued, her voice softening. "I can't promise that I'll ever fully trust you again. But I can give you this. If you ever break my trust again, if you ever hurt me like this again, there won't be a second chance. This is it. There will be no coming back." Ethan's chest tightened as he heard her words, but he nodded, his heart full of gratitude and understanding. "I promise," he whispered. "I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve you. I will never hurt you again. I swear it." Anya let out a shaky breath and placed her hand on his cheek, gently lifting his face to look into her eyes. "You'll have to show me, Ethan. You'll have to show me every single day that you're the man I thought you were. I need to see that in your actions, not just your words." Ethan nodded, tears welling up in his eyes once more. "I will, Anya. I swear to you, I will do whatever it takes." Anya stood there for a moment, her heart still torn but now filled with hope. It wasn't an easy decision, and she knew the road ahead wouldn't be without its struggles, but perhaps, just perhaps, love could find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. She took a step back and gently kissed his forehead, the soft touch speaking volumes more than any words could. "I'm willing to try," she whispered, "but you'll have to prove yourself to me, Ethan. Every day." And with that, Ethan finally rose to his feet, feeling as though the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was a chance to show her that he was worthy of her love, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Together, they stood there, two people forever changed by the events that had unfolded, but with a fragile hope that they could rebuild their love, piece by piece, one day at a time. Months had passed since the heart-wrenching betrayal, and though time had done little to erase the scars, it had certainly begun to heal them. Ethan had undergone a transformation, a complete and total shift in how he saw not just Anya, but love itself. He had spent countless nights reflecting on his actions, on his desires and temptations, on the broken trust he had left in his wake. In the beginning, it had been hard for Anya to even look at him without remembering the hurt he had caused. But slowly, through consistent actions, he began to show her that he was a man who had learned from his mistakes. Ethan was no longer the man who had taken her for granted, the man who had let his ego and power overshadow the love they had shared. He had learned that love wasn't about ownership. It wasn't about fleeting passions or a means of proving his worth. It was about commitment. It was about trust. It was about loyalty. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized that love was not something you could possess or manipulate. It was something you nurtured, you built, and you protected. Anya noticed the change in him. He no longer demanded her attention or praised her for her beauty. Instead, he respected her in ways she had never thought possible. He didn't try to control her, to mold her into his idea of what a wife should be. He admired her independence, the strength she had shown in standing by her principles, in never allowing herself to become a mere trophy or symbol of his wealth. Ethan had always admired her, but now he truly saw her. For the first time, he understood her worth outside of her role as his wife. He had seen her as an equal, as a person with her own desires, dreams and ambitions. Gone were the days of lavish gifts and extravagant gestures meant to buy her love. Instead, Ethan learned to show his love through patience, respect, and understanding. He no longer sought her validation through wealth or status. He sought her trust. Anya had given him a second chance, but it was a fragile second chance, and he knew it. Every day, he worked to prove to her that he was deserving of that chance. For Anya, it wasn't easy. The hurt had been so deep, the betrayal so cruel, that at times she wondered if she would ever be able to fully trust him again. But slowly, she began to see the sincerity in his actions. It wasn't just words. Ethan had begun to listen to her, to understand her needs, her fears, and her dreams. He stopped expecting her to play the role of the dutiful wife and began supporting her in her independence. He encouraged her to pursue her passions, to continue her work in the canteen, to hold on to the things that made her who she was. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to sacrifice herself for their relationship. Ethan respected her space, her voice, and her autonomy. Anya still couldn't forget the pain he had caused, but with each passing day, the weight of that betrayal began to lift, replaced with a growing sense of trust. She found herself laughing with him again, sharing quiet moments that reminded her of why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. They were rebuilding brick by brick, but the foundation was stronger now. It wasn't built on illusions or expectations, but on honesty and vulnerability. Meanwhile, Ryan's life had crumbled. He had been left alone, betrayed not by Ethan, but by Olivia. In the days following the fateful night, Ryan had faced the reality of what he had agreed to, the price of his decision. Olivia's betrayal had shattered him. She had cared only about the money, about the life it promised, and not about the vows they had shared. Her greed had eaten away at their love, and in the end, Ryan realized that the wealth they had longed for could never replace the love that had been lost. It had cost him everything. Olivia, having lost Ryan, never returned to her senses. She sought out riches, but they never brought her the happiness she thought they would. Her life spiraled, empty and hollow, as she searched for fulfillment in all the wrong places. Meanwhile, Ryan, broken but not defeated, made the decision to move forward without her. He couldn't change the past, but he could control his future. He filed for divorce, ending the marriage that had once promised him a better life. He learned the hardest lesson of all, that true love wasn't measured in money or status. It wasn't about exchanging your heart for temporary gains. It was about devotion, respect, and mutual sacrifice. Ryan started anew, not with riches or fame, but with the lessons he had learned through the pain. He found peace in simplicity, in being true to himself, and in never again letting anyone or anything define his worth. As for Anya and Ethan, though their journey was far from over, they had emerged stronger than ever. Their love had been tested, torn apart, and almost lost, but it had survived. They had learned that love, when truly put to the test, could be redeemed, but only if both partners were willing to confront their flaws, face their past, and fight for each other. Anya's forgiveness had allowed them to rebuild what had been broken, and Ethan's transformation had proven that people could change if they were willing to put in the work. Together, they had learned that love wasn't perfect, but it was worth the effort. Anya and Ethan, scarred but stronger, moved forward. Their bond had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but in the end, they found each other again, not as two people who had it all figured out, but as two souls who had grown and learned from their mistakes. And as they stood hand in hand, they knew that their love, though imperfect, had become unbreakable. Because true love, when tested, when redeemed, is a force that nothing can destroy.